I'm former Assemblymember Lloyd Levine, and it's my pleasure to be able to speak to you today. I wish I could have joined you in person, but unfortunately my schedule prohibited that. I was elected to the California State Legislature in 2002, and I served for 6 years, the maximum allowed under California law. During that time, I was the chair of the Utilities and Commerce Committee and focused primarily on energy and telecommunications issues and environmental issues. As you know, one of the subjects that I worked very hard on was crumb rubber and rubberized asphalt. This is something that I found very important, and it fit the times that we had here in California. I first learned of crumb rubber and rubberized asphalt somewhere around 1998 when I was watching a special on a news program, I think it was 2020 or Nightline, and they had a nice feature on rubberized asphalt. At the time, I was not yet elected to the legislature, but I was working for the legislature. I brought the subject of crumb rubber and the videotape that I had seen to the attention of my boss at the time. I arranged for some meetings. The Department of Transportation predictably was not very interested. They'd always done it their way. We're just going to keep doing it our way. Don't bother getting in our way and telling us these newfangled products. And my boss didn't feel like pushing it. When I got to the legislature in 2002, I knew that rubberized asphalt and crumb rubber was something I wanted to work on. It's a huge environmental problem here in California, and I thought it was something that could really bring some positive solutions to California in a number of different ways. Now, I don't have to spend any time telling you all about the benefits of crumb rubber and rubberized asphalt. You know them. You know them better than I do. There's so many engineers in the room. You guys know all of the properties of crumb rubber. But I learned a lot of those properties as well, and it made me an expert in the legislature, and it gave me the credibility to go talk to my colleagues and to the Department of Transportation and persuade them that this was a good idea. You know, for me as a politician, I saw it as a benefit because you had an improved product. You had rubberized asphalt, which could replace existing asphalt. Instead of using the existing asphalt, you now had a product that would last over twice as long, and you needed, in most cases, 50% less. In the long run, it would save taxpayers a significant amount of money. The first stumbling block I came to was when I put my legislation into a bill form the first time. The Department of Transportation came to me and tried to persuade me that it's much too expensive. So what I ended up doing was fighting the department for the first year and explaining to them, getting them to understand, and in fact change the way they calculated the cost of crumb rubber. My success during the first year in rubberized asphalt and crumb rubber didn't even involve legislation. It simply involved getting Caltrans to change the way they measured. Caltrans used to measure on a per ton basis. So per ton, rubberized asphalt was more expensive than regular asphalt. Additionally, they measured over a 10-year lifespan of the product, which negates one of the significant benefits of rubberized asphalt, the fact that it can last twice or 3 times as long as regular asphalt. At the end of the first year, I was successful in convincing Caltrans to internally change their calculations so that they weren't doing it on a per ton basis, but on how much they actually needed for the project, per mile basis, which really reduced the cost. Additionally, I got them to factor in the amount of time the rubberized asphalt was going to last, so they changed their long-term cost projections, which immediately, without changing anything else, dropped the comparative cost of rubberized asphalt. I didn't want to stop with the internal victories of changing Caltrans's measuring and costing procedures, because I still knew that alone wasn't going to solve the problem. In California every year, we had somewhere between 9 and 10 million tires going into landfills and tire piles. Scrap tires at the end of their life with no higher purpose. These are the ones that will catch on fire in the tire piles and burn for years and years and years, polluting the atmosphere, releasing untold numbers of toxins. These are the tires that would go into landfills, take up an amazing amount of space. I was told at the time, if I remember correctly, that tires and television sets were the 2 worst things you could put into landfills. And I knew that just the simple changes I had succeeded in gaining the year before weren't going to be enough to really make a difference. I had also seen in other areas around the country different policies that had gone into effect. You know, I believe it was Texas, for example, that had a law that said tires couldn't go into landfills. Well, you know, on the face, that seems like a good idea. But the result at the time was that Texas had piles of chopped up tires sitting around the state because there was nothing to do with them. So when I was writing my legislation, I knew the key to success was to create a demand for the product, to figure out something that would stimulate a demand for tires. That product was crumb rubber and rubberized asphalt. In California, as I suspect it is around the world, the single biggest user of paving products is the government. Yes, there's private pavers who pave, parking lots and things like that, but by and large, the government paves and uses asphalt for the roads, the highways, and all of their paving needs. They are the biggest procurer of rubberized asphalt, or asphalt in general, and they're the biggest user of it. I knew that whatever solution I achieved was going to come from using the government as a driver of demand. So what I did with my legislation, and I believe this was a really smart and principled thing to do, was to create a program that over a period of time increased the requirement for the use of crumb rubber by the Department of Transportation. So I gave them 1 year to implement the legislation, and then the following year they had to increase or had to meet a benchmark standard of a certain percentage of crumb rubber in all of their paving projects by ton. The next year, or 2 years later, I gave them 2 years for that. 2 years later, that went up a little bit further to 25%. And then 2 years after that, it was to be 35%. So what you've seen is an increased phase-in the use of crumb rubber in California with achievable benchmarks, but still ones that make the Department of Transportation stretch, move out of their comfort zone, find new applications, new ways to use the crumb rubber. I felt that by doing that, we would stimulate demand, we would increase the demand for the product, and that would help the industry. Because one of the things that I was told, and I'm sure you all know this, was that because there wasn't enough demand, it made it very difficult for companies to go to banks and financial institutions to get the capital necessary to expand their business, which in turn would reduce the production costs, which in turn would make them more competitive. So it was kind of a vicious cycle. There isn't demand for our product, and because of that, our costs are too high, and because our costs are too high, there isn't demand for our product. But by creating that demand through legislation, through a government requirement, that changed the equation. The companies, your companies, could in fact, the ones based in California, take my legislation to the bank and use that as evidence for demand for their product to show the banks that yes, in fact, we will be able to sell this and we can get those loans. So the whole thing was actually relatively complex, but carefully thought out. It was what we here in America and others around the world term a market-based approach. It's one that really just kind of made sense to start with the market principles and let the market be the driver for what to do with the product. I'm pleased to report that as I sit here today, in California, the Department of Transportation, who 10 years ago refused to make any concessions at all, and who 6 or 7 years ago fought me on my legislation, that very same Department of Transportation now uses crumb rubber and rubberized asphalt as their default paving product. If their engineers want to use something other than crumb rubber or rubberized asphalt, they actually have to get special approval to use that. They have to seek a waiver for permission to use something other than rubberized asphalt. And right here in California, near the state capitol, we have a major highway, Interstate 80. Interstate 80 runs across most of the United States. It also connects Sacramento to San Francisco, so I end up driving that road quite frequently. And that road is undergoing major renovations right now, and I am pleased to tell you that the entire renovation of that major state highway is being undertaken with rubberized asphalt. And I can't tell you the amount of pride I take and the amount of pleasure I take when I drive to San Francisco and I cross the sections that are rubberized asphalt, and we're now talking miles and miles, and all of a sudden the background noise drops dramatically as the rubberized asphalt, as you know, is quieter. My car rides smoother on it. And I see that nice black sections that extend out into the distance. I can't tell you the amount of pride I take in having been able to accomplish that, because it's not just for me. It's the state of California that wins. And this is something that right now I think California is leading the way on, although I do have to give credit to Arizona, who was doing this 25 years before California did. But California in terms of legislation, is leading the way. California also is a much bigger marketplace, larger population, more tires than they had in Arizona. And we are leading the way for the rest of the country. What I expect to see in the future, the principles of my legislation be adopted throughout the United States and perhaps in other countries in the world. At a certain point, I hope we cross a threshold. And I hope that threshold comes soon where we don't need legislation to convince departments of transportation to use rubberized asphalt. I'd like to see a day where they use it because it's a better product, not because the government told them to. In California, I chose to push the issue because I knew my constituents, the people I represented, would appreciate the fact that I was saving them money, giving them better roads, and helping the environment all at the same time. But it shouldn't take that level of commitment from a state legislator to fight tooth and nail to get this product implemented. People should do this because it's the right thing to do. It just makes good sense. Departments of transportation across the country should be looking at rubberized asphalt and crumb rubber and say, this makes sense. We don't need the legislature to come in and tell us. We're going to take credit for saving the taxpayers of our state money. This makes sense in other areas around the world as well. There are so many benefits to crumb rubber and so many countries who could stand to use the crumb rubber in improving their roads. And so many countries around the world who have tire problems that it just makes sense for almost every application you can think of. You know the properties of crumb rubber. Many of you are the producers of crumb rubber. This is something that could be used in the heat of the summer at the hottest places on earth and in the freezing cold of winter. It expands and contracts. It can be used in jungles. It can be used in heavily traveled highways. It can be used in South America. It can be used in Central America. It could be used in Africa, Europe. It can be used all over the world. It can be used in Asia. I know you're all sitting in China right now. This could be used extensively to help improve and modernize the roads in many, many countries throughout Asia and the rest of the world as well. All it takes is people with vision. It takes the people in the industry to communicate, to talk to the government leaders, to talk to the regulators, to talk to the bureaucrats, and tell them about the product. Explain to them that they can be heroes in their communities, that people will appreciate driving on these fantastic roads, that people who live nearby will appreciate the fact that the noise is reduced, that they're doing something about an environmental problem. You can be a hero by selling this product to governments around the world. I can't stress strongly enough, it's about communication. We need, as ambassadors, as emissaries to the rest of the world, to those who don't yet know, we need to talk about the product. We need to explain to government why this product works and why they should be using it. Well, I know you know many of the benefits of rubberized asphalt. Let me just take a minute to summarize them. I found that it sounded like I was on a TV infomercial selling something when I would talk about the benefits, but it really is just that good. First of all, because of the rubber properties in the road beds, when it gets cold in the winter or when it gets hot in the summer and the road expands and contracts, it doesn't crack like conventional asphalt because the rubber binder provides that flexibility. Additionally, the rubber component provides extra stopping protection in the rain. The grip between the rubber on the road and the rubber in the tires provides a little bit extra measure of safety when the roads get wet. In neighborhoods where there's residents and people living, the road is actually quieter. The rubber properties in the roadbed absorb some of the sound from the tires and the engine, and it reduces the extra noise that would bother neighbors, would bother people in neighborhoods. These are just a couple of the benefits. The rubber component provides such flexibility that it creates a longer life of the product. That was one of the selling points, as I mentioned, that was key to changing Caltrans, our Department of Transportation's perspective on how they cost out the crumb rubber, was the lifespan of the product. There are so many other beneficial attributes to crumb rubber that I really don't have time to go into them. And frankly, you all know them as well or better than I do. But it is, it is one of the few products that I've seen where it is truly a win-win-win situation. It's a product that is better than an existing product, and it's cheaper than an existing product. That's why I was so passionate about trying to get it implemented and trying to make those changes here in California. As for me personally, while unfortunately I'm no longer in office due to California's term limits on elected officials, I do hope to someday get back into public office. I felt really proud of the accomplishments I was able to achieve in my 6 years, and I feel like I've got more to give. But just because I'm not in office, doesn't mean that I'm not committed to public service and to helping improve my community. Right now, I'm doing consulting for a number of different companies and trying to help them interface with government. And I remain committed as an emissary of crumb rubber as well. Just because I'm not in office anymore doesn't mean I've forsaken the products that you all produce. I'm committed to continuing to work on my end to help with that fight. And I know that you all are as well. You don't need to be convinced. You just need to go out there and start convincing others, or continue to convince others. And soon, the rest of the country in the United States, and hopefully many countries around the world, will be as advanced as California is. Again, I wish I could have been there personally. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak to you via videotape. Hopefully I can join you at the next conference, and good luck and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.